Hey, everybody, it's Dr. Craig Malkin, a clinical psychologist and lecturer for Harvard Medical School, also the author of Rethinking Narcissism, which is devoted to helping you understand and cope with narcissism in all its forms and all your relationships. Today, I want to talk about when are narcissists the least helpful. This is based on a study that I read a little while ago that actually has some helpful information on understanding what conditions need to be in place and what kind of factors increase the likelihood that somebody that you suspect is narcissistic will actually be helpful. If you like my videos, please give them a thumbs up. Please like, comment, subscribe by turning the notification bell on. That way you can see them when they come in and not miss anything because you'll be notified when I do new videos. I want to start with a review of the two different kinds of narcissism because they're actually examined in the study. That is overt or grandiose or obvious narcissism and covert or hypersensitive or vulnerable narcissism. Those are the two types with all the different labels. I really prefer extroverted and introverted narcissism because that is the personality factor that most strongly correlates with each. That is the loud, brash, outgoing narcissist that everybody is familiar with, who is boastful and can be really condescending and arrogant. That's that extroverted narcissist or grandiose narcissist. And they are grandiose on the outside, and any kind of vulnerability or insecurity that they have is more hidden. It's on the inside, but the grandiosity is on the outside, and that vulnerability is not very apparent at all. And then the introverted or covert narcissists, their grandiosity is hidden. They are not obviously pompous or arrogant. In fact, they're shy, often self-effacing, socially awkward. This is what we see in the research and also in clinical practice. And their vulnerability is on the outside. In other words, the grandiosity is hidden. It's not really all that clear that they have big dreams or they're inflated in some way. That is something that only becomes apparent over time through their behavior, and most of the time they seem kind of withdrawn. So those are the two types. And the question is, when are narcissists the least helpful? And in other words, when are they more likely to help if they're going to help at all? And does it differ by type? And not surprisingly, the answer is yes, but not in the ways that you would suspect. There's a lot of discussion about narcissists and how obstructionist or unhelpful they might be, or unempathic and caring, and then seemingly in the public eye, what they do makes them look like nice people in some way. And that, it turns out, is not the outgoing, brash kind. And I think this is where people get confused about covert narcissism. Another confusion, this idea of somebody seeming to be nice. Now, as you know from the research that I've shared with you in my previous videos, somebody who's vulnerably narcissistic or covertly narcissistic isn't necessarily nice in any sense of the way that we mean, meaning they're not openly warm or caring and helpful. So even that whole idea of somehow somebody having one public view where they come across as just like the best person ever, but privately they're awful, I think that's another confusion. It has more to do with what's called covert abuse. But in this case, what the distinction that's important to make is that when it comes to overt narcissists and introverted narcissists, again, most people predict that you've got that sort of nasty, brash person, and that's how they are to you privately, and then out when they're in full view and people can see what they're doing, that's when they behave better, or they seem to be a better person. It turns out to be far more complicated than that. I want to share this study because it also is just a good story. These researchers did something really clever once they tested to determine who was a narcissist according to measures and who had the more extroverted or grandiose narcissism and who had the more introverted or covert narcissism. Once they determined those categories, they set up a little fake experiment. And what they did was they had people participate, as they often do. These were undergraduates. We often in psychology use undergraduates for this kind of research, and you can test and see who comes out high on these narcissistic measures. They had them come in for an experiment where they were supposed to provide peer counseling. And the person that they were going to help with the counseling was actually confederate of the experimenter who had been planted there in each case. And they sit down and they read something that this confederate wrote about their struggle and their pain, some difficulty. And when the participant is about to be a counselor and help this person, the experimenter comes into the room and says it's off. The project is off. It turns out that the confederate that the actual research participant is supposedly going to help, remember they're a plant, they're not really there for help, that the confederate had misbehaved, that they not only arrived late for the study, but they insisted on using the bathroom first. And then when the experimenter's assistant went out to look for them, they weren't using the bathroom at all. They were on their cell phone messing around. So the experimenter dismisses that participant in front of the actual research subject, says, "You're not going to get credit. Bye. See ya. Have a nice day." And here's where the experiment really starts. Now there are two phases. The experimenter then says to the participant, "You have a chance to help so-and-so, even despite their screw up. You can be a part of a study of theirs. Do you want to be a part of it or not?" And they build it up a little bit. They try to sell it in some sense because they're interested in the actual research and they want the research to proceed despite this person's screw up. That is a condition of the experiment where the participants are exposed to a high pressure situation. It's the actual experimenter who are asking them to help. I should mention that earlier the confederate had also said, "I've got a little project, you don't really have to do it if you don't want, but maybe we can do it later." This is the study that the confederate was referring to. And now the experimenter says, "Do you want to be in this?" This is high social pressure. In that moment, on the spot, the person has to decide whether or not they're going to participate in this research study that their partner, they think, blew up the study of the day and kind of screwed everything up for them. Will they do this project anyway? So that's the high pressure situation. And then they also got to privately report in a feedback session. They were given a piece of paper and they got to privately, anonymously, their name wasn't on it, report, do they think that confederate should be given a second chance? Do they want the researcher to talk to the confederate, basically to try to smooth things over? How forgiving do they themselves, as somebody who went through this, feel towards that person? They got to ask those questions. And should they let them off and give them another shot, or should there be strong consequences for this? This was the private helping situation. That is, it was considered helpful, obviously, if the person could find in their heart to say, "Yeah, I think you should talk to them, give them another chance." It was a way of them being helpful to that confederate and showing that they care and they can have some generosity, but it was private. There was no social pressure. Here's what they found. If somebody was grandiosely narcissistic, if they had the more extroverted, loud kind, they didn't really want to help anyway. I mean, and that was sort of true of the covert narcissists too. They were not especially helpful compared to people who weren't high in narcissism. But with the grandiose narcissist, with that extroverted narcissist, when they were in the condition where it was strong social pressure to help, when the experimenter put them on the spot and say, "Hey, you want to do this?" They didn't care. They said, "No, absolutely not." When the covert narcissist was in the high pressure situation, they said yes. And what the study authors realized is that whereas the more grandiose or overt narcissists really didn't care what people think one way or another, they're that invested in their grandiosity, and they'll certainly take an opportunity to knock somebody down if they get a chance, and they don't care if it's in front of the experimenter. The covert narcissists, who are very invested in at least feeling like somebody sees them in a good light, will give in to that pressure. They will say yes, because their hope is that if they are held in higher esteem by this person, that sort of increases their own sense of value. Remember, this is what covert narcissism is about. They're more vulnerable. They're not impervious the way somebody who has grandiose narcissism is. The other thing they found is that in the private condition, even if they said, yeah, I'd like to do the experiment and showed some kind of forgiveness in that way, privately, they were more than happy, just like the grandiose narcissist, to throw the person under the bus and say, come down on them hard. Yeah, give it to them. They don't deserve a second chance. They also reported being angrier even than the grandiose narcissist, with far less feelings of willingness to forgive. What does this do for us in the way of information? Well, the distinction is that whereas somebody who is that loud, brash, extremely extroverted narcissist is not going to be swayed by public pressure of some kind. If you're in the workplace with somebody, or you're in a relationship and there is some obvious, visible, overt, manifest evidence that this person has said yes or no, or been helpful or unhelpful, the more visibility is, the more pressure, the more likely they are to be helpful, not necessarily because they are strongly motivated to, but because they hope it will raise their value in the eyes of whoever is watching. So if you're in the workplace and you're in a situation like this, or if you're in anywhere, in any parts of your life where you're needing somebody's help who seems narcissistic, particularly in this more vulnerable fashion, you want it to be visible, you want it to be public, you want it to be noticeable, and then they're much more likely to be helpful. And especially if it is some degree of accountability, that is, where it's ongoing. They can't just say yes and then not do anything, but it's something that people continue to see. So if you really need somebody's help and they seem to be functioning in this way, the more obvious, the greater the social pressure, the more likely it is to work out in your favor, and really everybody's favor, because the helpfulness actually affects everyone. I would love to talk today to somebody in this video who's extremely narcissistic and how this speaks to them. Maybe I can do that at another point as a follow-up to this, but I hope you found that helpful. If you do, please like, subscribe. Like I said, give it a thumbs up, comment, so I can share more information like this. Thanks.